Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're headed to the mountains, the snow-capped peaks of Colorado, for a case that's, well, it starts simple enough, but takes some pretty wild turns.
Yeah, a murder mystery in a picturesque setting. It's the case of Scott Sessions, a musician whose body was found, well, let's just say it wasn't a peaceful scene.
So right off the bat, we know this isn't going to be a typical crime scene. What was it about the discovery that made it clear something was very wrong?
His body was found burned, wrapped in plastic, and to make matters worse, there was a deep gash on his neck.
That's a horrifying image. It
Yeah.
sounds like someone really wanted to make this body disappear.
Absolutely, and the lack of blood at the scene told investigators that he wasn't killed where he was found.
So the killer transported the body.
Yeah.
That takes a certain level of, well, callousness, I guess.
Right. It speaks to premeditation and a desire to cover their tracks, but it also raises questions about the killer's connection to the victim. Why go through all that trouble?
I see what you mean. So how did this investigation even begin? Did someone report Scott Sessions missing?
Yeah, he was a trumpet player,
Yeah.
well known in the local music scene. When he missed a gig and his family couldn't reach him, they knew something was off.
It's that gut feeling, right? When something's just not right.
Exactly. And their instincts were spot on. The police found Scott's car abandoned in a grocery store parking lot. But get this, security footage showed the car arriving there long after he was already dead, according to the timeline they were building.
Wait, so someone was driving his car around after he was already murdered? That's a bold move and a pretty big risk for the killer.
It definitely suggests an attempt to mislead the investigation, create a false trail. But as we know, every move leaves a trace.
Did the investigators find anything in the car that pointed them in the right direction?
Not really. But they got a lead from Scott's online messages. It turned out he'd been communicating with a woman named Heather Frank, and their messages hinted at a planned meeting the night he vanished.
Okay, so Heather Frank becomes a person of interest. What kind of person was she?
Well, she lived very close to where Scott's car was found, which immediately raised suspicion. But as they dug deeper into her life, they discovered another piece of this puzzle, a rather unsettling one, her ex-boyfriend, Kevin Eastman.
An ex-boyfriend with a history of violence. That sounds like a red flag.
Yeah, a big one. There was an active domestic violence warrant against him. So we're not just talking about a jealous ex here, but someone with a documented history of aggression and control.
This is starting to sound like a dangerous mix.
Mm-hmm.
Did the police immediately zero in on Kevin?
They were definitely interested in both Heather and Kevin, especially after phone records placed them near the body dump site the morning of the murder. But there were some strange things about Heather's behavior, too.
Such as?
She called in sick to work the day after Scott disappeared. Then she was visibly upset when his body was found. But then she went on a shopping spree like nothing had happened.
It's almost like she was putting on a brave face, trying to act normal when everything was falling apart.
That's one way to look at it. Maybe she was trying to create an alibi, or maybe she was terrified of Kevin and what he might do.
So did they have enough to bring either of them in for questioning?
Not quite yet. But things were starting to add up. The investigators got more location data this time from Kevin's car, and it placed him even closer to the body dump site than Heather.
It sounds like the net was closing in. What happened next?
Donnie and his team decided they needed to act fast. They requested search warrants for Heather's home and arrest warrants for both her and Kevin. They thought they were finally closing in on their suspects.
But you said this case takes some wild turns. What happened?
The night before the planned arrests, Donnie was watching Heather's condo and saw her and Kevin leaving. They were headed towards a remote farm outside of town.
Why a farm? What was out there?
Donnie had a bad feeling about it, like maybe Kevin was going to try and get rid of evidence. He decided to follow them, and what he saw that night at the farm, well, let's just say it changed everything.
Okay, now I have to know. What did he find?
It was late. Donnie saw Kevin by a fire pit, and he got this feeling that he was burning evidence.
I bet that got his adrenaline pumping.
What did Donnie do?
He couldn't just wait for backup. It was too risky. So he took a chance and followed Kevin.
Wow, that's brave. Talk about thinking on your feet.
Donnie ended up apprehending Kevin single-handedly at a gas station nearby. Kevin was filling a gas can, probably, to get rid of more evidence.
Wow, so Kevin's in custody. But what about Heather? Was she still at the farm?
That's the thing. While investigators were interviewing Kevin, another team was searching the farm. They found another body.
Oh, no. You don't mean?
It was Heather. And just like Scott, she was burned and wrapped in plastic.
This is just awful. 2 lives lost. What was Kevin's reaction when he found out about Heather?
He broke down during the interrogation.
Is it possible he was actually heartbroken? Or was it all an act?
It's hard to say for sure. People grieve in different ways, and sometimes it's impossible to know what's truly going on inside someone's head.
So was there anything at Heather's condo that could help investigators piece together what happened? The crime scene at her condo was gruesome. Blood on the floors and walls, signs of a violent struggle.
It makes you wonder about those inconsistencies in her behavior leading up to the murders. Could she have been trying to protect herself? Was she being manipulated by Kevin?
It's definitely a possibility. Remember, there was that domestic violence warrant against Kevin? There's a history of control and abuse there.
It's a chilling thought that she might have been a victim in more ways than one.
Exactly. Abusers often use fear and intimidation to keep their victims silent. And in this case, it's possible that fear ultimately cost Heather her life.
So what were the charges against Kevin?
2 counts of first-degree murder, tampering with a deceased body, and tampering with evidence.
And because of his history of domestic violence?
Right. The penalties were enhanced. He was facing a very long time behind bars, if convicted.
So the prosecution's theory was that Kevin killed Scott out of jealousy.
Yeah.
And then killed Heather to cover his tracks.
Exactly. And the evidence was strong. The location data, the blood at Heather's condo, the fact that both bodies were disposed of in the same way.
What about those online messages between Heather and Scott? Do we know for sure who was sending them?
That's a question that lingered throughout the case. It's possible that Kevin was using Heather's account to lure Scott to his death.
That's a terrifying thought, to use someone's own technology against them like that.
It's a reminder that abusers can be incredibly manipulative and cunning. They'll use whatever means necessary to maintain control.
So what was the verdict?
The jury found Kevin Eastman guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 27 years.
Wow. So justice was served, but it doesn't bring Scott and Heather back.
No, it doesn't. This case is a tragic reminder of the devastating impact of domestic violence.
It leaves us with a lot to think about. It's hard to process everything we've learned. 2 lives lost, families shattered, a community left wondering how this could have happened.
It's the kind of case that stays with you long after the verdict is read.
Donnie, the lead investigator, has been pretty open about how this case affected him personally.
Right, he's talked about the burden of those unanswered questions.
Like, what if they had gotten those warrants sooner? Could Heather's life have been saved?
It's a heavy weight to carry that kind of guilt and doubt.
It makes you realize the immense pressure investigators are under in these situations.
Every decision they make has potentially life-altering consequences.
In this case, they did everything they could to build a solid case, but tragedy still struck.
It's a stark reminder that sometimes, even with their best efforts, law enforcement can't prevent every tragedy.
And it highlights the need for greater awareness about domestic violence. We need to be able to recognize the signs and know how to help.
Absolutely. Those inconsistencies in Heather's behavior before the murders could have been cries for help.
The shopping spree, her emotional distress at work, maybe those were her way of trying to reach out.
It's possible abusers often isolate their victims, making them afraid to speak out.
Which is why it's so important to talk about domestic violence openly, to
Okay.
create an environment where victims feel safe coming forward.
Exactly. We need to challenge the societal norms that allow these cycles of abuse to continue.
It's about holding abusers accountable and providing resources for victims.
And it's about educating everyone on the signs of abuse so we can intervene before it's too late.
This deep dive has been a difficult one. It's exposed the darkness of human nature, but it's also shown the strength and resilience of those fighting for justice.
And it's a reminder that these aren't just isolated incidents. Domestic violence is a pervasive issue that demands our attention.
So as we wrap up this episode, we want to leave you with this thought. What can we do individually and collectively to prevent tragedies like this from happening?
How can we better support victims and hold abusers accountable? These are questions worth pondering.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a complex and heartbreaking case. We hope it's given you some insights into the realities of domestic violence.
Remember, knowledge is power, and together we can make a difference.
Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay compassionate.